Okay, hold on. Good evening, folks. Welcome to a New Jersey Constitutional.
Hold on. Good evening, folks. Welcome to a New Jersey Constitutional. Hold on. Good evening, folks. Welcome to a New Jersey Constitutional.
Hey, bear with me 1 minute. I'll see you. Okay, Bob, you there?
Okay.
Very good. New Jersey Constitutional Republicans are happy to have Bob Patterson, CD2, Republican congressional candidate, here with us to discuss his campaign and various issues that are important to the Constitutional Republican movement. Bob, welcome to the show and good to see you tonight.
Thank you, JR. Thank you for making time for me tonight. Good to see you, JR.
Good to see you. Bob, tell our listeners and our viewers about your distinguished career in many ways, who you've worked for, in what departments you've worked for before in government, and all your public service record. Tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, I served as a speechwriter in the George W. Bush administration for 5 years, serving both at at the Department of Health and Human Services and the Small Business Administration. I also served in the Trump administration as a acting associate commissioner of the Social Security Administration. But probably my DC work that was to me most valuable was my work with the U.S. Business and Industry Council, where we labored to fight the corporate outsourcing of all prime sectors of our economy to places like China and Mexico. The U.S. Business and Industry Council worked to defeat or to block the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, along with Obama's Fast Track Authority, because we were dead set against what's been going on for 30 years in this country of basically taking our manufacturing sector and taking the prime jobs and prime production lines and moving them to China and moving them to places like Mexico. And this has decimated the American middle class, decimated places like South Jersey. So I'm very proud of the work I did with the U.S. Business and Industry Council. This was during the Obama administration, and pushing against the corporatists, the bankers, and the globalists that wished to continue this outsourcing of jobs to China and Mexico.
Right. Now, Bob, you have a very extensive, I would consider you an academic for sure. You've written a lot of great op-eds, National Review, Philadelphia Inquirer. You've debated with the various academics. You did a discussion on your mentor, Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president. And I just want to read a little bit for the people, then have you take over. You published an article a few years ago called Revitalizing America, and this is really, what you're standing for. And you go back to TR and his square deal, which I want to talk about tonight, the square deal, which was a safeguard, quote, as TR said, the rights of wage worker and capitalist, of investor and private citizen, so as to secure equity as between man and man in this republic, unquote. And then in balancing labor and capital, which is what your initial Republican principle, in balancing labor and capital, TR leaned on Abraham Lincoln. And of course, Abraham Lincoln was a great influence and a mentor to TR. And Lincoln observed in his first annual message to Congress exactly 40 years earlier, he said, quote, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration, unquote. And central, this goes into the article that you wrote, central to TR's efforts would be calling corporate America back to the nation building role that it played so well in the past, building factories in the United States, developing our workforce, and securing what would become known as the arsenal of democracy. In a dangerous world, this is your quote, in a dangerous world, safeguarding America takes priority over allowing big business to ship its operation overseas, hand over its best technology to China, very relevant today, and move increasingly into financial services and slash millions of Americans from its payrolls, all in the name of short-term profit. So talk about the square deal, Bob, and why TR is your man.
Well, TR is one of my favorite presidents. And of course, TR, and we might call him the founder of the American century, of the 20th century. He wasn't a founder in the 18th century sense of the term, but he was a founder of America in the 20th century. And all TR did was to basically continue the great tradition of Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton coined what we call the American School of Economics. Henry Clay did the same thing with the American system. Lincoln built the Transcontinental Railroad. And what these Henry Clay was a Whig, but he was a precursor to the Republicans. But in this, basically, in this straight line from Hamilton to Teddy Roosevelt, they believed that a great country has to maintain a certain industrial base, has to also maintain innovative infrastructure projects. And so in Hamilton's view, and Henry Clay's and Lincoln's and TR, a country is not a country if it doesn't have industry and it doesn't have infrastructure. And what we've done in the last 30 years, and let's bring this up to today, in the last 30 years, our great leaders in Washington, D.C. and New York City have essentially turned their backs on these building blocks of American greatness. They've forgotten manufacturing. They've backed away from infrastructure projects. And they've become free traders, and they've outsourced, industry. And they believe that basically the prevailing ideology of Washington and Wall Street since the 90s, we're going back to George H.W. Bush, is to bet the country's future in high finance and globalist trade. And meanwhile, we've lost, 6 million manufacturing jobs. We don't hardly make anything here anymore. And even the things we make here, the components are made elsewhere. So I like Teddy Roosevelt because he represents the best of the American tradition. He represents this American School of Economics, the American system. And in doing so, when you have that approach to economics, you take care of the average laborer. And if you take care of the average laborer, you basically take care of everybody else.
That's right. And what you're talking about is what the New Jersey constitutional Republicans are aligned with, in getting the Republican Party to once again represent the middle class, representing the private sector. This is what Lincoln talked about with labor before capital. The Republican Party over the last century and a half has almost mimicked the aristocracy that existed in the South with the slave power.
Well,
that they thought that the elites should be managing society, that they should be in charge of government, and they should be in charge of the economy. And Lincoln came along and said the economy needs to be opened up to the farmer, to the worker, to the laborer. And this is what the Republican Party needs to get back to, which will identify with a populist middle class. And TR picked up on that as a result of the industrialization and the robber barons, if you will, who again had tremendous political power. They were the elitists, they were aristocrats, and TR came back and said the same thing that Lincoln did. We need to get the Republican Party back to the middle class. Wouldn't you say?
Lincoln referred to these people as the plain people. That was his terminology.
Yes.
TR used the term average American. Silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge used the term middle America. And even Reagan was a president that cared about the average worker. He was able to bring in a lot of Democrats to the Republican Party. And so he was a fan of the average American as well. So I would say the Republican Party lost this fascination with the average American in the post-Reagan era. It wasn't, it's really a recent phenomena of the Republican Party. We forgot we forgot about the girl we took to the dance. That's kind of what they use in political lingo here, that we forgot the middle class, and we've got to reorient ourselves so that we can generate jobs, livelihoods for the middle class, and at the same time create the industrial base that a superpower needs to defend itself. I mean, right now, there's an awful lot of manufactured goods, high-end electronics that we don't manufacture here. We don't make steel here. We don't, even TVs, computers, they're all made in China. And we need to maintain an industrial base to protect ourselves. My wife and I watched a couple of weeks ago the movie Apollo 13. It was the 50th anniversary of that remarkable rescue effort of the Apollo 13 coming back. And the whole moon project, we could not do the moonshot today because we don't have the industrial base to do it.
Right. And what's interesting too, Bob, as we look back, is that really FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, who I believe was a cousin or a nephew rather, or a cousin to TR. And TR, of course, was the one who talked about a square deal.
Yes.
And then FDR came along with the New Deal. So FDR looked to TR as a real mentor in many, many ways. And he understood the importance of getting the middle class working again, allowing them to be able to succeed and to keep their property and to keep what they own, not to be overburdened with taxes. And this is the message that you want to bring to Washington, and the message that the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans are talking about as well, correct?
Well, TR, that's exactly right, because even with the pandemic, we've lost, what are the unemployment numbers now? 35 million Americans lost their jobs in the last 3 months. And even before the pandemic, you had about 11 million Americans out of work or working part-time and wanting to work full-time. So we have today roughly 50 million Americans.
A million of them in New Jersey too.
Who are unemployed. And so we've got to, find jobs for them. We've got to get this economy going. And see, it's not just the pandemic that brought this on. I mean, we've had trouble for 30 years. We really have. And the economy was not, we were still manufacturing a lot of goods even before the pandemic over in China. We still do. And so we've got to find a way to take care of the middle class. And places like South Jersey, the second district is a microcosm of what's gone wrong with the country in the last 30 years. This trade-off of putting everything in high finance and globalist trade and ignoring manufacturing, infrastructure, and defense industries. And if we're able to recapture that original American tradition, we bring back manufacturing to the United States, there will be plenty of spillover to places like South Jersey. So I'm running. I've written on this topic for years. I talked about the dangers of China for years. I've always been a manufacturing and infrastructure guy. And this is the way we can take care of South Jersey. It's been neglected for 30 years. 30 years. We've lost populations. I mean, we're losing population. We're losing jobs, and we've got to turn things around.
Right, and as you go down to as a representative of CD2 South Jersey, what are some of the bullet point issues that you would like to address? A couple of them.
Well, here's a couple things we need to do. We need to, first of all, we've got to bring back our manufacturing from places like China and Mexico and bring them back to the United States, not send them to India or Vietnam. We need to bring them back to the United States. We've got to also, I have promised too, if I'm elected, I will introduce a House version of the Senate Hire Act. And the Senate Hire Act is laying out to break up Washington and bring 90% of federal agencies and jobs to the heartland. And if that bill passes, we would find agencies to bring back to South Jersey, another aspect of job creation. And the other thing is, I've always talked about infrastructure projects. We've got to finish 55 to the Parkway. I've talked about a bridge from Cape May to the Delmarva Peninsula. I've also talked about for years extending the Patco high-speed line to Atlantic City. Once you bring these jobs back here, there will be rationales to do major infrastructure improvements. And these are the ingredients of making America and South Jersey great again. Now, let's remember, I'm running up against Jeff Van Drew, the incumbent former Democrat, just recently switched parties as a Republican. And he's been in elected office for 30 years. And I don't know what he has done over the 30 years to lay out a recipe to make South Jersey great again, or to reverse the trajectory that we're on. We've got to change direction. We need new leadership, and we need a conservative Republican who's going to support Trump and bring manufacturing back.
One of the things too, Bob, I'd like to mention, and going back to the fine article that you wrote called Revitalizing America, National Review. Incidentally, we posted it up on New Jersey Constitutional Republicans group page a couple of days ago. You can find it there. But one of the things that is important is for South Jersey and for the nation altogether, but specifically South Jersey, is that what has happened is there's a lack of economic mobility. People can't switch jobs. They're not able to get other jobs. They're not able to move. You're pretty much stationary. And economic mobility was, of course, a pillar of the Republican Party, of Lincoln's policies, of TR's policies. And in the article, concerning a lack of economic mobility, you cite demographer Joel Kotkin, who calls, quote, the gradual descent of the middle class into proletarian status, unquote, which you say is a de-evolution that, coupled with mass immigration, in our case, illegal immigration, has turned California, and we can also say New Jersey, into a land of income extremes that resembles a third world country, as opposed to that strengthening of the middle class and giving governmental policies and running government to the point where it's going to provide an environment for economic mobility and strengthening the middle class, the private sector, right?
I'd say this is the legacy of American deindustrializing. We have outsourced all these factories and jobs that traditionally have paid a very generous family wage with benefits. And you didn't need a college education to work at a factory, and you made enough money to provide for a family with very generous benefits. We call this a high wage economy, family wage economy. When you've taken manufacturing out of the economic sector, the only thing that's left is service jobs. And service jobs they're important jobs, but they're derivative, and they don't pay nearly what manufacturing jobs do. And then what we've done is we've, in a sense, what has happened over the last 30 years has been a wholesale substitution of high wage American jobs with cheap foreign labor. And either we do that by outsourcing jobs, or we bring in not just illegal immigrants, but we bring in a lot of foreigners on visas, and they're paid less money than American workers. And so there's been a wholesale exchange of high wage American jobs with cheap foreign labor. And it does, Teddy Roosevelt warned about this back in the early 20th century. And we need to take care of our own people first.
Right. As we begin to conclude, Bob, I want to talk about, you're well aware, as many of our Constitutional Republican members and followers, of the series that we produced entitled Abortion v. Natural Rights, where we've given beginning with an historical perspective and the historical environment from which abortion has been made legal in this country. And also we've done an in-depth step of analysis of Roe v. Wade, and we've identified many, many foibles, if you will, that occurred during that decision. And it's amazing the amount of people, Bob, who are not aware of the injustices as they were provided as a result of the Roe v. Wade decision. And we're about to release another video tomorrow or the next day entitled Roe v. Wade, a Legal Challenge, which we believe we're going to go back in constitutional law and historical constitutional precedent, very much using the Dred Scott decision, which was a decision that galvanized and created the Republican Party. In 1857 was the decision. Of course, the Republican Party went on to win with Abraham Lincoln as our president, who believed that the Dred Scott decision was erroneous. And today, the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans, very similar to the Dred Scott decision, we believe that the Roe v. Wade decision is erroneous. We believe that the inviolability of the life of the unborn child in the womb needs to be recognized constitutionally with an overturn of Roe v. Wade. There's much better science out there now, and the time has now come for a legal challenge to Roe v. Wade. And the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans are dedicated to the unalienable right to life first and foremost. Absolutely. So please talk to me about your thoughts on Roe v. Wade, and let the viewers and the listeners know your position.
I salute your efforts to draw attention to the serious problems with Roe v. Wade and what that decision unleashed in America. And really, in this congressional race, you could not find a clearer choice, a sharper division, because, Jeff Van Drew, the former Democrat, has 100% congressional scorecard, 100% rating by Planned Parenthood. He calls himself strongly and unequivocally pro-choice, and that he says he's a strong defender of Roe v. Wade. And I'm just the opposite. I have the endorsement of the New Jersey Right to Life PAC. I'm 100% pro-life. That decision was bad on so many merits, basically took away the ability of the states to regulate abortion law, and the 9 Supreme Court justices imposed their will on the country. And it's been a disaster in so many ways. And so I'm 100% pro-life. I'm glad that I have the support of the New Jersey Right to Life. And what I find, what my team of volunteers is discovering, as they call voters all across South Jersey, they are, mostly pro-life. They don't support Planned Parenthood, especially public funding of Planned Parenthood. And so there's a real clear difference here. I'm the only pro-life candidate in this race. I will fight for pro-life principles. I will fight to defund Planned Parenthood. Jeff Van Drew is just on the opposite side. And this is not a personal criticism of Jeff. Jeff is entitled to his liberal positions, but his liberal positions on abortion are not those of South Jersey.
Well, the Constitutional Republicans are proud to have you here tonight discussing these issues with us, Bob, and we're going to have you back again. please give us some
Thank you, JR.
remarks to conclude, and we'll have you back on very soon.
Well, we do have this primary coming up, and it's been moved to July the 7th, and we have it's essentially a vote by mail primary. The voters will be getting their ballots in the mail within 2 weeks. You can still vote at the polls, but you'll have to vote provisionally. And so what we've done with my race and candidacy, we are giving the voters of South Jersey a choice. They have a choice between the conservative, pro-life Bob Patterson, lifelong Republican, conservative Republican, or the liberal Jeff Van Drew, who was a lifelong Democrat, only recently joined our party and is pro-abortion. And so it's a very clear choice in this primary election. I encourage your listeners, if they want a conservative congressman, they should vote for Patterson on July the 7th. Thank you, JR. And they can check me out at bobpattersonforcongress.com. We're running a vigorous campaign. We got our TV ads up this week, and we're excited about to see what happens on the 7th of July.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. And as the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans, we are committed to the structure of the Constitution, the separation of powers, which is needed to thwart the centralization of powers. The founders were ingenious in coming up with the structure of the Constitution. That's why we call ourselves Constitutional Republicans. We believe in the structure. And as Republicans, we believe in the initial principles of Abraham Lincoln as he went back to the Declaration of Independence and articulated our ideological and philosophical ideas for the purpose of government and the way in which government should be implemented. And we believe that the Republican Party indeed needs a reformation back to the original principles of Abraham Lincoln. Thank you, Bob, and we will be together again soon. And all the best to you, and thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, JR. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend as we remember the men and women who died for this country.
Absolutely. Remember our Memorial Day. Absolutely. Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye.